Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invitation, and I won't keep you awfully long, but long enough. And certainly, I was just thinking as I was sitting there the first time I came in, not this auditorium, but in this building. I was a youngster from a little junior high school out in rural Connecticut County, and we had a trip, what we call a field trip. Came up here and we came to the Archives and History Building, and I'll never forget that trip. I also want to thank all of you for your participation. You're inviting me and staying on the case to be sure I was here on time, and that's just great. You know, it's a pleasure as we look back, and I was saying to some earlier, that I look back over all of these things and what some of the fights, while we were fighting. You know, I just don't even know why. You look back at it now, our children can't figure it out either. What was the fuss all about? But at any rate, we're here. In Fannie Lou Hamer, Mississippi, in 1964, made the statement that she was tired of being sick and tired. Those words came after the sit-in movement, but I suspect that was what was going through many minds, including the minds of many young black students, including me and some others. We were probably tired of being sick and tired. And one has to kind of get a backdrop. What was the climate? What was the atmosphere? What was in our minds? And there were a lot of things in our minds. One thing was in my mind was that when I went into the Army in 1956, we left H&R Point on our way to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. But we stopped to get lunch on our way. And as it turned out, the white recruits went to the front door and went in the cafeteria. We were all going to serve our country. The black recruits went to the window to get our box through the window. I'm not suggesting that was what motivated me. There was something I have never forgotten. And that's what I suspect was happening through a lot of minds. We felt crushed. You know, we came back. I went to Korea. We came back, and we were having fun. It had been white soldiers and black soldiers side by side. And we came back on a troop train out of Fort Lewis, Washington. And we were just having fun. Then all of a sudden the train got to the Arkansas line. Left Missouri, came to Arkansas. Because we were headed to Fort Chaffee. And what happened? The black soldiers were put in one boxcar with all blacks, and the whites were put in another. And many of the whites became upset. What in the world is going on here? They too couldn't understand it. But this is the backdrop. Here, because in 1960, February 1st, we saw students all over the Southland, but particularly in North Carolina, where we saw students who just was tired of being sick and tired of standing up when white folks came in and to give them their seats. And there were many whites who didn't like that either. That was the system. But these young blacks struck the match and sent a signal across this country that gradualism was no longer acceptable. What do I mean by gradualism? We use the court system, and you lawyers know, all of you who watched the law, you can take a case and drag it out 10 years and never get what you want, and then when you get it, some judge will take it from you at the very end. You lawyers know about that. So here we are. But these young blacks said no. And they were not called together by the elders, the old civil rights leaders. They were tired of being sick and tired. So they sat and lifted up freedom. They sat and lifted up freedom. And what did they do? They would not get up. And they, by sitting down, they stood up for freedom. And that brought us to Montgomery, Alabama. This, on the 25th day of February, 50 years ago, we in Montgomery, Alabama, students at Alabama State College, as it was called at that time, got tired of being sick and tired. And the thing about the whole sit-in movement was, this was a movement by young people. It was not a movement plotted or planned by the seniors. This was their young people were saying, we're tired. And it was an idea whose time had come. No army is stronger than an idea whose time has come. So I got a call from, no, it was not a call, Arthur Foster, a veteran whose dad worked in Crenshaw County as a teacher, came and said, Reed, we want to go pull a sit-in tomorrow. You go with us? I said, yes, I was ready to go. And we did. We went to the Montgomery County Courthouse, and I'll never forget the gentle lady who was eating as we hold our heads down as we eat oftentimes. She had her head down, and all of a sudden she held her head up, and I was staring her right in the face. I didn't have any sandwich, I didn't have any food, but I was at the table. And that happened throughout the courthouse. Soon they closed the courthouse down, and of course the political folks got active then. The law enforcement people got active then. And that's where I'm going to spend some of my time on this issue and what happened at Alabama State. There were 29 of us. There were 20 that had Alabama addresses. They were residents of Alabama. There were some 9, some of them may have attended high school or born in Alabama, but they had out-of-state addresses. And at that time, the governor of Alabama, Governor John Patterson, appointed the State Board of Education. We did not have an elected State Board of Education. The State Board of Education was appointed by the governor. And for some of you, just for a brief footnote, you know, everything, Alabama's governor is the strongest governor in the country to this day. That goes back to the Constitution of 1901, because all the power of state government is in the hands of the governor and at the state level. I won't dwell on that today. That's for a different setting. But at any rate, Governor Patterson at that time, like other governors, had appointed the State Board of Education. And the State Board of Education did what the governor told them to do. So when we went to the courthouse in Montgomery, the sheriff, Maxim Butler, the chief of police, and the state troopers all assembled at the county courthouse. We were told to leave. We were told we were trespassing in a public facility. Other folk who were there were trespassing, but we were. We were later to be called agitators because we simply wanted a level playing field. That's all we wanted, level playing field. So ultimately, the governor of the state ordered President H. Council Trenholm, who in my opinion was a good man, a good educator, carried the school when the state of Alabama barely gave it any money to operate. But he was caught between an idea whose time had come and his superiors, the State Board of Education, who what? Did not have any concern about what time it was. And you go back to that, and I want to get back to this backdrop again. Because we just come out of we had the Montgomery bus boycott. We just got Brown versus the board in 1954, because that didn't mean anything to Alabama until later on. I mean, Alabama school was just as segregated in 1960 as they were in 1954. But at any rate, the backdrop of this, and this whole effort on the part of everyone, I mean, everybody was talking about freedom. Everybody was talking about civil rights. Everybody was talking about, and there had been several Supreme Court cases that had helped motivate and help blacks to start the demanding. You know, even back at Shirley versus Kramer, or restricted covenant cases. All these cases were out there. Browder versus Gale had been won. The Montgomery bus boycott had been won. There were many things. We just passed the 1957 Civil Rights Act. A lot of folks don't know there was a 57 Civil Rights Act. The 65 Civil Rights Act was later. But the 57 Civil Rights Act was passed during the Eisenhower administration. And the 1960 Civil Rights Act was also passed. And we had seen Governor Wallace challenge Judge Johnson on the enforcement of those laws. So all of this is the climate in which we operate in now. We operate in a climate of confrontation. We operate in a climate where there are demands being made. We operate in a climate where there will ultimately be a test of the federal government, who's going to win and who's going to lose. Well, we know the story. I don't know of any time where the federal government has lost when it wanted to stand firm. So, Governor Wallace challenged the federal government. Judge Johnson made him behave. But this is the backdrop. This is the backdrop. So students are determined. We were not only called outside agitators, we said we were trespassing. And Governor Patterson missed the punch. He thought somehow, and he wasn't probably different than many other whites, he thought somehow that the black leader, or in this case Dr. Trenholm at Alabama State, and later on we would define black principals across these high schools, could not make black folks behave. Black folks were not willing to surrender their civil rights, their goals and objectives, because a governor said stop. It also came out of this whole movement. The first time I heard it, and there's a big debate about it, and I'm not going to try to claim any credit for it. I mean, for us, I don't mean me, but for us, this whole we shall overcome. There's an argument that it started in Montgomery. Now, some other arguments say it started other places. But we shall overcome, and we are not afraid. We used to say it all the time. As we were having meetings throughout, because the Montgomery community responded well to us. Dr. King had just left. He'd left Dexter, gone to Atlanta, but then he came back. He came back. We had big rallies everywhere. And ultimately, we threatened that if the students were expelled, we were going to shut the school down. We were going to boycott the school. I was never strong on that. Really wasn't. But you're in a meeting with the crowd, you don't always have your way. But I was never strong on school because I always thought that played into the hands of those folks who didn't want us to have an education in the first place. So that was my theory. But at any rate, ultimately we said we boycotted some classes, but we also advised by our lawyers that you can't stop other folks from going to class. So ultimately, the effort to get students to boycott succeeded. There were many students who just simply didn't go back, and those who had been expelled, in many cases, were offered scholarships. So the movement had support not only in Montgomery, not only on the campus. Yes, we had faculty members who supported our movement. They would have been asinine not to, because we were trying to knock down some barriers that they were also up against. But we also knew the economic factors. I mean, folks didn't have any tenure. AEA and ASTA had not merged at that time. Because right now, if a teacher has a problem now, they may lose, but they're going to lose only because they're wrong. They're not going to lose because they don't have any help. But in those days, you were at the mercy of the administrator and the State Board of Education. When we were all put on probation, we did not have a hearing. They just passed a resolution and put us on probation. Then it's very interesting. For those of us who were put on probation, I lived in the dormitory. My job, I was the janitor. I was a good one. I flushed stools. Other folks didn't flush. I made 25 cents an hour. And I swept the floors other folks made dirty. But I did my job well. But when I got ready to come back to school and get my dormitory assignment in 1960, this was the fall of 60, I had to talk to Dr. Trenholm. And while the state board had put us on probation, the question was whether or not I was going to be allowed to live on campus or not. Dr. Trenholm called me in and talked to me about my behavior and thought we were all hurting the school. My response to him was, no one was trying to hurt the school or trying to hurt him. And I reminded him that one day he came out in the hall of Council Hall and some students started booing him. And I told him not to boo Dr. Trenholm. I said, we don't have a fight with him. And I reminded him of that in his office. And he remembered that situation. He didn't realize I was the one who said that. And I told him in those days, some of you may know it, if my age, I'm 71, but if you're close to my age, you remember how we had white and black shoes. We used to wear them a lot. White and black shoes were very popular. And I compared our situation at Alabama State with a pair of white and black shoes. Now, sometimes you have white and black shoes, you polish them, you try your level best not to get the black on the white or the white on the black, but sometimes what? You can't help it. That was my reply to Dr. Trenholm. And so he dismissed me from his office. He said, well, we'll check the bulletin board tomorrow, the next day, and we'll see what the committee is going to say about this. Well, good heart. We all knew Dr. Trenholm was the committee. Have no question about that in my mind. And at that time, I'd also been elected junior class president. And he talked about that. He talked about how we had heard in the school. And we went back. I went to the bulletin board the next day. So my name was up there. I'd been assigned to the dormitory again. So I was able to save my bed in the dormitory. After that, the governor had been told, Governor Patterson had been told there were a lot of faculty members out there who had been helping the students in this movement, and that they need to do something about it. And there's a gentleman by the name of L.D. Reddick. Some of you may remember him. Dr. Reddick was a very, very smart man. He's a historian. He wrote a book on Martin King, Crusade Without Violence. Dr. Reddick was ordered off the campus at Alabama State by 5 o'clock in the afternoon by the governor. That led to Alabama State University being put on sanctions by the American Association of University Professors for about 20 years. That's how long that was. That's because they did not treat Dr. Reddick right. Then there were a few other items that you just must know, and then I'm going to stop and let you ask some questions. The St. John Dixon case, I want to go back to that just a little bit. Because, as Fred Gray said in his book on Bus Ride to Justice, at that time we had one United States District Judge in the Middle District. That was Judge Frank M. Johnson. And Judge Johnson called them as he saw them. He was labeled under the theory that the State Board of Education had a right to expel us or put us on probation because higher education was not a fundamental right. And he, being Judge Johnson, allowed us to be put on probation in some cases and expelled in the others. That case was taken down to the Fifth Circuit. That time we didn't have the 11th Circuit. At the Fifth Circuit, and that was in New Orleans. And Fred Gray and others took that case, Solomon Say and others took that case to the Fifth Circuit. And the Fifth Circuit reversed Judge Johnson's decision. And what that case did, it set the predicate to this day, that higher education is a civil right, and that you cannot expel students from public institutions without due process of law. So that was the good that came out of that. Then there were a few other points that we definitely need to bring out to you. Alabama State at that time had no student body government, no student government association. It's 1960. Alabama State University did not have a student government association. So when we started marching and picketing and what have you, who was the leader? We just a bunch of folk out there picketing. We didn't have no organized government. It wasn't done by the Student Government Association. Bernard Lee, who was a veteran, had been stationed in Maxwell in the Air Force, emerged as the spokesman and the leader. Now, I read a couple of books about it. They claimed that Bernard Lee was the Student Government Association president. No, he was not. Bernard Lee was a student that we allowed to be the spokesperson for us doing that. So after that summer, 1960, we came back to Alabama State, and what had happened? Dr. Trenholm and others had concluded that we needed a student government association. When you got anarchy, when you got folks just floating about, You don't have anybody you can go to. And what happened? They concluded it was in the best interest of Alabama State to have a student government association. And I wound up being one of the drafters of the Constitution for the Student Government Association at that time. Bernard Lee and others, some never did finish college. Bernard went on to be an aide to Dr. Martin Luther King, and he is now deceased. We also formed out of this movement, because it was South-wide. It was just not Alabama State. I'm just kind of focused on Alabama State. But it was South-wide. On the Easter weekend in 1960, we met at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, and formed SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Now, that's where SNCC was founded. There were a lot of folks who came on later on and got involved in the civil rights movement, and we want to thank them for it. But everybody who said they were founders of SNCC weren't founders of SNCC. You know, there's a song that slaves used to sing and black folks were singing. Everybody talk about him ain't going there. Everybody who talked about SNCC went there. So we formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And that became also the coordinating group for the student movement across this state and across this nation. So the sit-in movement led to something else that kind of pleased me. When Governor Patterson got ready to run for the Alabama Supreme Court, he was running against Senator Howard Heflin. Well, he wasn't senator then, but he was a lawyer up at Tuscumbia. I taught school in Tuscumbia when I taught school up there, but I didn't get to know Senator Heflin at that time. But it turned out that Senator Heflin was running for the Supreme Court, and so was John Patterson. 1970. I just got elected chairman of the Alabama Democratic Conference. Oh, how sweet this is going to be for me. I got a chance back now to get even with Governor Patterson. Non-violently. How do you get even? We got even because the ADC endorsed Senator Heflin, and Senator Heflin won. Oh, how sweet it was. Then, and what goes around comes around. It turned out that I was on the Montgomery City Council, and Governor Patterson, who was a practicing attorney then, came before the Montgomery City Council with one of his clients who had been mistreated. Now, the client had been mistreated, no question in my mind about that, because he had been denied due process of law. The person had been accused of having an establishment that folks made a lot of noise, folks just acting up. But the person had not faced his accuser lawyers. He didn't know who made the complaint. Somebody called the complaint in, and they brought him before the city council. So here I was, standing there, or sitting, and I asked the president of the city council, why is this man here? Where are his accusers? We can't find them. He hadn't seen them. And yet he's here before the court of public opinion, and we are going to try him without anybody being able to testify against him except one telephone call. And as it turned out, I fussed so much about it, we dropped the case. So the next morning, I got a call from Governor Patterson. And he called to thank me for standing up for his client. But I wasn't standing up for the governor. I was just standing for what I thought was right. And so we chatted a little bit, and that ended that. And later on, we had a teacher who had been a black teacher who had been accused of something down in Washington County. But they struck all of the blacks from the jury. Struck them all. We lost the case in Washington County. And the case went to the Alabama Court of Civil Appeals. Criminal Appeals, I'm sorry. Court of Criminal Appeals. Judge Patterson wrote the opinion. And when I read it, I was very, very impressed with the opinion. I picked up the phone and called him to tell him how well I thought he'd analyzed the Batson rule, and that I was glad he had the courage to reverse that court down there and send that teacher's case back. So after those two episodes, I haven't seen Governor Patterson much since that time, but I will say we are on very cordial terms. And I will close by saying that I look back how much time we lost, we being blacks and whites in the South. And I've said this over and over and over again. I don't know of any movement that blacks have been involved in which they didn't have some white friends. I don't know of any movement that whatever it is, you can go all the way back to the Civil War, you go all the way back, wherever you want to go. You're going to look, you're going to find there were some white people who supported the black folks' cause. And that's a big plus for this country. Again, another one. We spend a lot of time on nothing, as I started off by saying. There were many Southern politicians who benefited from the civil rights movement. Whether they were, and they benefit from the sit-in movement. Their stores, the stores did not have to build two separate rooms. They didn't have to build 4 bathrooms, or sometimes 3. One for white women, one for white men, and one for black men and black women. Most of them built 3. But no longer did it have to be an extra bathroom. That's what happened. Then, of course, we had the whole Freedom Ride movement. The sit-in movement pushed and sparked the Freedom Ride movement. And I wouldn't want to have my seat without today thanking a person who was a good man. That's Floyd Mann. Floyd Mann. Some of you might not mean anything to you, but Floyd Mann was the director of public safety under John Patterson, and a very good man. We went to Dexter Avenue Baptist Church to march on the Capitol one Sunday afternoon. And the opposition was fierce. We all assembled in Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. We came outside. I would suspect it was 5,000 folk out there. And they didn't come to Dexter Avenue Church for religious purposes. We were headed for the Capitol. And it got so fierce. I don't think there was anybody in that group who wasn't scared. Because we were saying, we are not afraid. And I said, yes, I am. And we are not afraid. Yes, I am. Yes. I was afraid. But as we got ready to cross Decatur Street, all the way over to the Supreme Court building, I've never in my life seen a group of people with so much anger on their faces. And I suspect, except for Floyd Mann, somebody would have been killed that day. Floyd Mann sent us back into the church, and we had to march out like 2 by 2 to get back to the campus. I've never forgotten that man. And later on, we would see in the Freedom Ride, it was Floyd Mann who had to pull his weapon down at the bus station and said to one of the thugs, if there's going to be any killing today, I'm going to do it. So that was, I don't know what his thoughts were deep down, but he did his duty. He did his duty. And I am just amazed at how strong he was. And Maxim Butler as sheriff. Maxim Butler did everything he possibly could to keep the waters calm. He really did. And that's why for Maxim Butler, black folk got the right to vote. Maxim Butler didn't have anything to worry about. Because blacks kept backing him. They kept supporting Maxim Butler. Public city officials. L.B. Sullivan called on the governor to close Alabama State and said that the Alabama State Teachers Association, we're talking about March now. We're in the month of March now. And it's time for the teachers to go home. They call it ASTA week. They call it AEA week. We had two organizations, the black and the white. And when the black teachers would come to Montgomery, all across the state, some 5,000 to 7,000 folks, they spent money for what? They went to the stores, bought their Easter dresses, summer clothes. It was a big economic lift for the Montgomery economy. And when when L.B. Sullivan said, well, we ought to shut on the alarm, have the teachers to meet in Montgomery, the merchant said, oh, wait a minute now. You're going a little too far. You're going a little too far. This is our profit. So that didn't happen, and that was an idea that L.B. Sullivan had. That was an idea whose time had not come. And that ended that. So finally, I was about to say earlier, it's been very unfortunate for us, all of us, blacks and whites. There were many Southerners who could have been and should have been president of the United States, only because they had to carry this badge of infamy called racism. And the three Southern presidents we've had, not a single one of them who ran for office the second time didn't get wholesale black support. Lyndon B. Johnson, black folk love Lyndon Johnson. Jimmy Carter, Southern born, Southern bred, Sunday school teacher, peanut farmer, Navy officer, true Southerner. Black folk love Jimmy Carter. Bill Clinton out of Arkansas, a little boy out of Hope, Arkansas. They were able to rise above. They were able to rise above this badge. Because as time moves on, blacks got the right to vote. They and Southerners got to be president. And you look around, you wonder what all this other fuss was about. When you look at it, what was it about? In many cases, it was about politicians using whites for their own political well-being. That's what the sit-in movement is about. That's what I saw. That's what I heard. And I'm just so glad that good Lord let me live through this era, being born in 1938 from a rigid, segregated society. Rigid, segregated society. To come all the way across. As Judge Johnson, we're going almost full circle. Till we get to what the Constitution promised all of us. Thank you.
Now, Dr. Reed will take some questions. We have a few minutes for questions. Raise your hand, and we will give you a microphone. And please speak into the microphone so the people in the other auditorium can hear.
Excellent, Joe. Joe, can you talk a little bit more about when you raised L.B. Sullivan? A lot of people don't know that it was Alabama State students and the treatment they received from L.B. Sullivan when they locked y'all up in Kilby Hall, and then the New York Times, and he sued the New York Times, and that whole First Amendment, which came out of Montgomery, Alabama State students, opened up for the hustler and anybody else that elected popular public celebrities can be sued and without damages because they're in the public domain.
I think the most important thing, she's talking about the case of the New York Times versus Sullivan. L.B. Sullivan. Both places where it went up on New York Times versus Sullivan. Started off Sullivan versus New York Times, who won, the other side appealed it. But what happened at that time, L.B. Sullivan had been exposed for his treatment of blacks, and other things had been said. I won't go through the whole case because I know we got a time factor here. But what it wound up being, the jury in Montgomery convicted black preachers and some other folk and began to take their properties. Reverend SSC and some others, they took their property. The case went up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled, that's the key to this whole thing, that public officials can be criticized. And just because they dislike it is not malice. The burden of proof is so heavy that a public official who's criticized by the public can hardly win a lawsuit against the person who criticizes them. So the case New York Times versus Sullivan established some First Amendment rights on the part of the press that allows public officials to be criticized without penalty or without fear or favor on the part of the person who's doing the criticism. Now, I cut through what Gwen was after here, but that's the fundamental issue. I see another hand. Yes, sir. Reverend.
I don't have a question, but an announcement. I think everybody should be aware of the fact that 1 week from today there will be a day-long conference on the sit-in movement at Alabama State University at Abernathy Hall, and Dr. Reed will be one of the participants, and he will be recognized for his role in the sit-in movement.
Thank you. Thank you. Several of them are coming. We'll be back. Anybody else have a question? I saw a hand over here.
Dr. Reed, can you talk a little bit more about the, you said one of your classmates talked to you and convinced you or asked you to participate in the sit-ins. Did you hear about it before then? Did you hear about any student unrest and the student plans, or was it new to you when that student approached you?
Well, it was kind of really and truly, there was no pre-caucuses or pre-arrangement. It's kind of a spontaneous type thing. It met up to Abernathy's house that night, and that same night, Arthur Foster came to me and said, "We're going to go march tomorrow." And it was quick. It was not a case where, we all sat around and said, "Let's do it today, let's do it that, let's do it that time." And it was very quick. And Arthur didn't take long to tell me, and I didn't take long to answer. We were ready to go. I mean, really, that's really what happened as it relates to me. Now, some others may have talked about it without my knowledge, but I was not privy to that. Yes.
I've seen footage of the sit-ins at the lunch counters. And I was wondering, did your group participate in anything like that at the lunch counters down at H.L. Green and Cress's, or was it just the courthouse?
Courthouse.
How did your parents of the students in the sit-ins, how did they respond to your spontaneous action?
Okay, Jerome, I'm glad you mentioned me. The question was, how did the parents react to students' participation? Many parents said to their students, "Stay out of that." They were scared for their children. So many parents, what happened, the White Citizens Council called on the state government to release the names of all those who had participated. So all the names were released, and in the counties where they were from, their addresses. So during the teachers' meeting I just mentioned a minute ago, many students were, that's Alabama State shut down at that time. Alabama State, because blacks didn't have any hotels to stay in. This is 1960. Now, we hadn't gotten the 64 Civil Rights Act. So Dr. Trenholm closed Alabama State, and teachers would come to Montgomery and live in the dormitories, because there was no other place for them to stay. So the school was shut down. And of course, some students were afraid to go home. Now, all of us weren't afraid to go home. Some were afraid to go home, because I went home. I didn't know where to stay. But many parents were afraid. Many parents, didn't bother. And many students were afraid. I mean, you got to think about what time of year it was. But that's a reaction. Most parents were afraid. Yes.
Who called on you to get involved in SNCC, and why was that important?
The question was, who called on me to get involved in SNCC? At that time, when we left going to Raleigh, North Carolina, we didn't have SNCC. That was going to be a Southwide meeting. Shaw University is a small black college in North Carolina, private college. That's number one. So that was one reason. So we went to Raleigh, 4 of us. Went James Richburg, Anna Ruth Young, Bernard Lee, and I. Went up in Richburg's old 51 Ford, cream color at the top and pink at the bottom. I never forget. Had good tires on it, but we struggled on up to North Carolina. And I'll never forget the color of that car. It was the funniest looking color I ever seen. But at any rate, that was it. It was 51 Ford. But we went up there. And after we got to Raleigh, we formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in Raleigh. But there was a national call. Dr. King had just been to Africa. He came back and he had a national call for all of us to meet, for students who were in the movement to meet. And 4 of us went from Alabama State. And that's how we wound up going. And we got up there, we then formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, came back, and we had another meeting October of Easter weekend 1960, and then October 1960 in Atlanta. We met in Atlanta at that time. But that's how we wound up there. We formed the SNCC.
Dr. Reed, it was good to hear you talk about the military and your trip on the bus, because the same thing happened to me when I left Fort Knox on the way to Fort Benning. We got in the South. They wouldn't let me eat. Most of the soldiers that I was with on the bus brought me food, put me in the cafeteria, asked me to leave. And that was in 1960. So it hadn't changed much.
Yeah. Well, 1960, that's right. It hadn't. Yes.
Did anyone come to you constantly trying to persuade you not to participate?
Oh, most folk would say, be careful. We didn't have to. But teachers supported us. I probably stayed out a little too long boycotting the class, and when most folk were back in school, after the boycott ended of classes, we finally stopped boycotting classes. But I said I was never for that, really. I just didn't embrace that. But I was cooperating, and I over-cooperated. I stayed out a good little while. But not really. We didn't have a lot. Teachers would say, you be careful. And then they would tell you, too, though, you need to be in school. Because, if you check my roll book now, I got to mark you. Whether you're absent or not. Yeah.
Dr. Reed, in SNCC, basically, wasn't there a little bit of a division with Dr. King, and that there was a little bit of, some people wanted violence, and the difference between the...
Not at that time. I mean, after several years, the question was whether people wanted violence. Some of the SNCC folk wanted violence, and they were therefore at odds with Dr. King. No, SNCC's name suggested nonviolence. That's one we put in there. Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That was the name of it. But when we later on, after the sit-in movement had passed and there were other users SNCC for different purposes, they may have advocated more action, more